Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video. For starters, Happy New Year. It's officially 2024, and this is the first video I've made for the year. And I wanted to start off this year on a more positive note. So we're going to be talking about FOMO and how to deal with it. I'd assume that majority of you already know what FOMO stands for, but in case you do not, it does stand for fear of missing out, which is most certainly something that anyone can relate to. Now, dealing with FOMO is one of those many things that is easier said than done. It'll definitely take some work if you're not predisposed to think this way, because of course this is a mental conundrum. And while we'll be focusing on dealing with FOMO in the context of Raid, any lessons you draw from this can definitely be applied in real life. I'll close out this introduction by highlighting some of the pros and cons of having FOMO. And yes, believe it or not, there are some pros which we'll get into later, but let's start with the cons. I think some of the primary emotions that people experience when they're going through FOMO is like jealousy or bitterness. You're really focusing on the have versus have not mentality, and you're thinking about, well, they have it, so I kind of want it, or other people might get access to it and I might not. And that kind of broods some bitterness, some jealousy of what other people have that you don't. But I think honestly, the worst part of having FOMO is that you start to develop the deserve mentality. What I mean by that is you start using deserve in places where it shouldn't necessarily be, meaning I deserve to get this. It's been so long since my last this. I deserve to get that. I deserve to get this. It's not a very healthy mindset to have, because deserve is a very, very dangerous word. At least from my perspective, anecdote here, I think things are earned, things are not necessarily deserved, but I digress. On the flip side, the pros of FOMO are definitely inspiration, and in the context specifically of Raid, strategy. Because sometimes when you look at a team and you think, I don't have those champions, but you might be inspired by the team composition or champions that you might have that are similar but not exactly the same, and you might come up with your own individual strategy that's not exactly a carbon copy of what you were inspired by. So FOMO isn't all bad, but you do need to have it somewhat under control, particularly in a game like Raid that is known for a lot of RNG and a gambling aspect as well. So how do we fix FOMO? Well, I've got 4 tips that will hopefully be helpful to you to use if you're dealing with this particular problem. Tip number 1 is to focus on what you do have and not solely on what you don't have. And one of the best examples of this concept is actually with Demon Lord Clan Boss, and specifically talking about unkillable teams. Because for the longest time, for those who may not remember, or maybe you didn't play back in the day, one of the most wanted champions in the entire game was Maneater. An epic champion, Void to be fair, but nonetheless one of the most desired champions in the game, because he enabled unkillable teams, namely the Bat Eater type composition or just any double Maneater team. But also with the Painkeeper, you can make the budget unkillable team, which is very finicky, but nonetheless it would get the job done if you're just starting off with unkillable teams. Back in those days as well, block damage was an alternative comp to the unkillable based teams, but those were a lot harder to get the champions for because they typically featured legendaries, so Sir Nick or Roshkar the Tower, and Wardcaster as well, to make a full or closed block damage team. So Maneater was definitely the cream of the crop. Fast forward to today, and you have a lot more options for unkillable based teams. Now we have Epic Trunkheart, who is a fusion champion. We have Demitha, of course, who was featured as part of fusion, but also is another Void epic that can do a similar job enabling some sort of teams. Helikath was a fusion champion who could basically be a one-man army for unkillable teams. So the point is there's a lot more variety. And where this fits into our concept here for tip 1 is that now there are a lot more options. So if you pull a Maneater, you can chase that avenue, or if you pull a Demitha, you can chase that avenue as well. There's still the whole realm of traditional teams with ally protection, and the point is you have a lot of options at your disposal, and you need to just look at the champions that you have, not dream of the ones you wish you had, but look at the champions that you do have, and then use that to come up with teams. And of course here, deadwoodjedi.com is one of the best resources if you want to speed tune or use a speed tune for an already established team, namely unkillable teams, block damage teams, etc. But if you want a generic speed tune for like a ally protection team, that should be there as well. So a huge shout out to deadwoodjedi.com, where you can see all sorts of different clan boss compositions, Demon Lord compositions. Another great example is the comparison of Acrizia versus Husk when it comes to Hydra clan boss. Both of them feature enemy max HP hits, but of course Acrizia is superior because she has it on every single ability, including the AoEs, so she can put out a lot more damage. But for majority of players, you're probably not going to get her for a while, if ever at all. She is a Void legendary after all. But if you do have a Husk who's an epic champion who's a lot easier to get, you're not going to be able to do enemy max HP on every ability, but you do get it on his big money ability here, and you also have the provoke on the A1, which is strong for the Head of Decay. So again, focusing on what you do have. If you have a Husk, then you can still do up to Nightmare Hydra. Husk is on my Nightmare Hydra team, and he does really, really well in a pretty solid Relentless set. But obviously, if I had a Acrizia, he would come out or someone would come out and she would go in. And so you can upgrade when you get champions who are better, but you can still do things in the end game with a lot of champions that are already in the game that are a lot easier to get. Tip number 2 is to note the true odds, with emphasis on true, not the odds that you feel like you should have. This is where we start to get rid of that deserve mentality that I described earlier, meaning that we don't want to think about, oh, I deserve a legendary because it's been 50 shards since my last one, or 100 shards, or 200, or whatever. Obviously, the mercy system does exist, so there is a cap as far as bad luck can go. But nonetheless, it's not the best to think that way when you're talking about pulling shards or dealing with RNG in this game in general. So I encourage you to really understand the odds of what's going on or what you're participating in. Obviously, you can see all the rates in the game as far as the base rates. You can still see this during a 2x and whatnot. 10x's are a little bit harder to see, but nonetheless, I encourage you to figure out a way to get an understanding of how it works, either by checking out one of your favorite creators, myself included. I do breakdowns like that sometimes. Saf is a good one to mention as well, but have an understanding of what these numbers truly mean. One of the things I see the most complaints about is like a 10x or now the progressive chance events, where people get a legendary and it's not the one that they wanted or not the one they selected and whatnot. So let's take a little trip into the math and really understand what a 10x actually means. So these are the amount of champions in each of the respective shard pools, at least at the time of this recording. So 167 legendaries in the ancient pool, 163 in the sacred pool, slightly less because of login reward champions and whatnot, and 58 in the void pool. So for a single champion 10x, like the one going on right now for Xena Warrior Princess, you would have a 5.7% chance to actually get her if you got a legendary at all. For sacreds, it's basically the same because the pools are so similar. And then if it was a void champion, it'd be around 15%. But I always think looking at it this way doesn't really give you the full story. And so I always encourage people to think about it in the opposite way, not about the chance of you getting something, but the chance of you not getting something. So in this case, for ancients and sacreds, let's round up to 6%. So there's really a 94% chance that if you get any legendary during the 10x or whatever, that it's going to be not the champion featured. 94 is a lot higher than 6, right? We can all agree on that. So 94% chance of not getting the champion, which is substantially more likely than actually getting the champion. So you do truly have to be lucky to get the champion, but you shouldn't expect to because, like I said, there's a 94% chance it's not going to happen. And what I find even more interesting, that a lot of people, when they complained about 10x's, they're saying we need a 20x, we need a 25x, which arguably is part of progressive chance events now. But let's for the sake of argument, pretend that every single 10x from here on out was a 25x, because we've done that math as well for the progressive chance events. So you do that, increase the rates by 250%. Oh my goodness, legendary means it's guaranteed, right? Absolutely not. It goes up to a whopping 13% chance of that happening if you get a legendary. Again, flip it around. 87% chance that you will get a legendary that is not the one featured in a 25x. Again, substantially more likely that it doesn't happen than it is to happen. And that's the true numbers. You'd really have to get like 150x just to get to 50-50, more or less. I'm exaggerating the numbers there, but you get the idea that you'd need a lot of more champions in the pool or more copies of the champion in the pool to, air quotes, guarantee that you're going to get it. The only guaranteed thing in this game is hitting mercy if you get all the way out there, and obviously guaranteed summoning events. In a similar vein, another common train of thought is people thinking that, well, the rate from whatever event is, let's say 2x on ancients, it's 1 in 100 chance to get a legendary. I pulled 100 ancient shards, therefore what happened? I deserve to get a legendary. Again, deserve being the operative word there we don't really want to use, but that's just not how RNG works. 1 in 100 does not mean you're guaranteed to get 1 in 100 pulls. It just means you have a chance to get it. And mathematically speaking, it's actually a 64% chance that you get the 1 in 100, meaning that, 2/3 of the time it will happen within that first 100, infinite sample size. But there's always a 1 in 3 chance, more or less, that you won't get it in that 1 in 100 shot. So all of this math is not meant to be discouraging by any means. It's just so that you guys can understand what you're getting into when it comes to the odds of actually getting stuff when you pull shards. It's to help you set realistic expectations, but of course you should absolutely leave room for hope, because you never know, you might get lucky. And I also encourage you to appreciate when you do get lucky. And that does not necessarily mean just getting that specific champion featured in the 10x, 15x, or whatever, but also when you get a champion early, or when you didn't think you were going to get one at all, when you just pulled a random single pull of something, you get a legendary, or you pull 30 ancients and you get a legendary outside of a 2x. All of those things are still considered luck, even though you might not like what came out of it all the time. You're still lucky to get a champion, a legendary champion at all. And while it is certainly important to also acknowledge when you do get unlucky, unlucky. I think it's more powerful to appreciate when you do get lucky in the grand scheme of things. Tip number 3 is to set a budget and stick to it. And of course, this applies more to spenders than non-spenders like myself. The goal here is that no matter what, you do not go over that budget. Now, as a pure free-to-play player, I can definitely not speak to the temptation of offers and or potential good values that might come in the future. So I'm not going to specifically address that because I don't really have the background to do so. But nonetheless, setting a budget is definitely a useful tool, albeit somewhat cold turkey of an approach. But it just means that if you spent all your budget for the month in the first couple of days, then you don't get to buy any more offers for shards or energy or whatever else packs in the shop that you want to do. And you're just going to have to deal with what you've gotten already. Now, given that my budget is 0, I can't really give you that many examples as a free-to-play player. But nonetheless, the best thing I could think of is actually the champion pass for Xena: Warrior Princess. So obviously we've talked about this before. I did a review on this many months ago when this came out. But it's $40 more or less for a champion that you can only get from this champion pass. And so for a free-to-play player like me, I looked at that and I said, well, I'm free-to-play. My budget is 0. That means that I don't get her. Plain and simple. Is she a good champion? I would say average, maybe slightly above average. She's good, but she's not something that I'd be missing per se. And even if she was amazing, it wouldn't really matter because I can't buy it regardless. So I don't really dwell on it and I just kind of moved on. It is what it is. I don't get her. She's exclusive to this pass. And I guess you could technically pull her from shards, but as we talked about, the rates are not that good. And so I'm not going to focus or try to get her at all. And lastly, tip number 4 is to understand that temptation is not inherently bad. And what I mean by that is that temptation can actively drive you towards a goal because you want something, so you're driven to do the work or put in the work to get it. Decide what's most likely to get you your desired outcome. So if I was saying I want Xavia right now, I could pull all my sacreds right now and try to get her. But it would probably be better to strategize and pull during a 2x or pull during a pogo event or something where I have more certainty about getting a legendary at all, and then it might filter down to the champion that I want. Absolutely be prepared to pursue your desires, but also be willing to accept them not coming to fruition, because that is the nature of an RNG-based game. Remember that Raid is most certainly a marathon and not a sprint. A sprint is for the heavy spenders, and you can do a lot in this game just by playing slow, being patient, taking your time, and being very strategic. So that's going to do it for today's video. As I said at the top, I did want to start the year off on a more happy, uplifting tone, so hopefully that came across on this particular topic. I hope you all had a very good time over the holiday break. I most certainly did. Spent time with my family, helping them move house to potentially their last home ever, because they're nearing retirement. And feel free to comment down below what you got for Christmas, if you do celebrate Christmas, that is. As always, if you found this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. And if you enjoyed the content, then be sure to hit that subscribe button down below as well for more videos just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.